Okay, so welcome everyone. Again, I am Angel Muscane, the District Manager for Manhattan Community Board 11, and I'll be sharing some remarks and some brief announcements before handing the meeting over to the Chair of our committee, Mr. Villanueva. So until further notice, all meetings of Community Board 11 will be conducted by video conference. Links to register to attend the video conferences for each of our respective committee meetings are published on the meetings calendar on our website. The Executive Committee will meet later this month to ratify all committee action items in place of our full board. Just some etiquette notes. To avoid crosstalk and help the meeting run effectively, panelists and attendees are asked to keep their microphones on mute when they are not speaking. It is also helpful to utilize headphones. Those participating by phone can dial *6 to unmute. If you wish to share a question or comment, you may do so by utilizing the raise hands function. Our staff will monitor to ensure that hands are recognized in turn. Those participating by phone can dial *9 to raise their hand. This is important. We will only be calling on people that raise their hands. If you're submitting a question in the chat, I'm not going to see it. So please use the raise hands and be certain that we will get to you. Committee members will be called on first, then attendees. Please wait your turn to speak and we will get to you. Some brief announcements. The city's Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, ULURP, has been suspended as of the close of business on March 16th by mayoral executive order. That continues to be in effect. They're extending this order every week, 5 days at a time. So it continues to be in place as we speak. Second, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, the LPC, is holding its meetings and hearings virtually. The calendar of events is available on their website. On April 27th, New York EMB reported that plans have been filed for two 20-plus story buildings on Park Avenue at 118th Street. That building will consist of 202 units, and at 120th Street, that building will consist of 218 units. Per the 2017 rezoning, each project will be as of right and subject to mandatory inclusionary housing. There may be some actions required for those projects, but in essence, the building of each of those sites can be done as of right. Both projects will include indoor parking to replace the surface parking that is currently available at each of those sites. The owner of record for each site is BFC Partners. Just want to announce one of our board members recommended this event for our membership and for the public to be aware of. It's a free event called Design for Everyone, an intro to urban planning and design, which will take place Friday, May 22nd from 4 to 5 p.m. Participants will have the opportunity to learn the basics of how urban planning and design help to shape our cities, create communities, and make connections between people, places, nature, and the built environment. A link to this event is available on our website. And with that, I hand it off to the committee chair, Stephen Villanueva.
Angel, thank you. Thank you to our fellow committee members, board members, and guests. I am now calling the meeting to order. Today is March 13th, 2020, approximately 6:40 p.m. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion to adopt the agenda by Dendelin.
Second by Jessica Elliott.
Okay, Angel will now do a roll call vote. All in favor?
Elsie Encarnacion.
Aye.
Yes.
I'm going to call his name. Just give me a second. Elsie Encarnacion.
Yes.
Melanie Farah.
Yes.
Joe Goldblum is not present. Jessica Morris.
Yes.
Vinny Torres.
Yes.
Stephen Villanueva.
Yes.
And Candy Vasquez.
Moving on, we have a presentation from George James on 125th Street. This corridor is subject to a significant amount of development. We have been in conversation with our fellow committee members and board members about taking a step back and looking at the big picture behind all of the development that is coming to our district. 125th in particular has a significant amount of development either in progress, slated for development, or being considered for development. With that said, George James was asked to put together a presentation for us so that we can start off and continue an ongoing dialogue on 125th. Angel?
Thank you, Steve. Just to clarify a bit further for the attendees and for the committee, this was an assignment given to our land use consultant, Mr. James, to prepare a presentation that encapsulates all of the anticipated, current, and future development to be happening along this important corridor. We thought it was important to have this presented to our board and to our membership because some of these projects have taken a while to come about. There are many complicating factors with each project. It's a lot to take in. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity to have a check-in and an update on, okay, where do we stand in terms of all this development to get the full picture of what the future of 125th Street could look like. We get membership turnover from time to time, and it's hard to keep track of it, in fairness. So we wanted to present that both to our membership and to our community. George?
Oh, great. All right. Can people hear me and can people see the screen?
Yes.
You can see the screen, but you sound terrible.
I sound terrible. Okay. Let me see if I can help. I can improve this. If I speak loudly, does that help?
Not really, it's just a big echo, which you want.
I am going to try to take this off microphone, and I'm going to use the speakers on the computer. Okay, can people hear me better?
It's good enough, George. It's almost the same, but we can make it out.
Okay. Well, I will try to speak loudly and clearly. Okay.
I hear you.
You do? Good. Okay, so East 125th Street has been the subject of several planning and zoning efforts over the past 15 years. And I've just listed these here. There's the river to river study about 15 years ago. And then there was a whole bunch of planning around the rezonings that happened in 2008. And then we've had the 2016 MTA bus garage, EDC rezoning. There was the East Harlem plan in 2016 as well. And then we had all the planning activities around the 2017 East Harlem rezoning. But most of these did not examine the corridor as a whole. And the result, this is a zoning map right here, and I've outlined the 125th Street corridor in red. You have a very complex mix of zoning districts and special districts, and there's certainly no consistent form. It goes from an M11, which is the lowest density manufacturing district, up to a C47, which is, and a C64, which is a very high density commercial district. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the corridor and show it how it is now, and then show how it can develop in the future using large. Yes.
Transportation.
I'm sorry?
Somebody's mic is open, George. They don't know that you can hear them.
Okay, very good. Sorry,
George.
All right, so this is 125th Street in the center here. We go up to 126 and it's bounded by 123 and 127. There are substantial undeveloped parcels still, but change is definitely coming. So what we're showing now is a what we call an overbuilt, underbuilt map. And all of the blue areas that you see are areas that can take more development under zoning. Substantially more development if it's a darker blue. And so you can see that the corridor with a lot of high density zoning districts ends up being underbuilt pretty substantially. And so you could expect to see change. And a lot of that change is already in the pipeline. And it's not only new buildings. I like to point out that the Harlem River Greenway link is under construction. Now this area over here is a mess right now, but in theory, it's going to become an attraction not only for the neighborhood, but maybe connecting it to other parts of Manhattan as well. Heading to the west, many of you remember the EDC project for the African Burial Ground Memorial, which also includes 1 million square feet of residential and commercial development at 126 and 2nd Avenue. And then across the street from there, between 125 and 127, you have the potential to do substantial buildings as well. This is a very high density zoning district. We have 1 East Harlem, which is under construction right now with 400 units, but we still have empty parcels in this area, and substantial development could happen here as well. These developments are happening or have happened. Essentially, I think they still need certificate of occupancies, but they're basically done. The Salvation Army and the building over the DMV. And then further south, we have the sanitation cleaning site, lot cleaning site, and then potential development from the East Harlem rezoning along 3rd Avenue. Along Park Avenue, the east side of Park Avenue, again, you have substantial development from the East Harlem rezoning. I point out the Lee building here because the Lee building is a substantial building on Park Avenue, yet it's going to be one of the smaller buildings on that side of Park once it's developed. On the west side of Park, you have, again, another substantial developments that are either possible or proposed. This building was the last version of the southwest corner of 125 and Park. That was rezoned way back in 2004, and it's still an empty lot. The last building looked like this. What is the next building going to look like? We're not sure. Then finally, you have the National Black Theater site at 5th Avenue and 125. It's a 12 FAR building was approved there, a very substantial building. Could be built there now with the rezoning. And so under current regulations, I haven't done this before. It was really actually an interesting exercise for me. Under current regulations, all of these buildings can be built. And we're talking about 6,000 units roughly, and substantial commercial spaces. 6,000 units, that's more than 10% of all of the housing units in Community District 11. That's what could be added under current regulations. And because of a lot of these rezonings are for either 50-50 or mandatory inclusionary, we're talking a substantial portion of these buildings would be rent regulated. Somewhere around 35, perhaps up to 40%. And so we've actually exported this out into Google Earth. I could, for those who are really interested, we could do this live, or I could send you this so you could do it yourself, but this is what it looks like now. And this is what it will look like in the future, or could look like in the future. I'll do that again. Substantial change. But the amazing thing is that that's only what we know about. And there are still these dark blue areas that are substantially underbuilt. So just a couple of days ago, the Pathmart site got a filing at the Department of Buildings for a commercial building that looks like this. Now this site, we know that the developer wanted to build a larger mixed building here that had housing, commercial office, but the zoning here makes that hard. The zoning is not conducive for substantially mixed use building. And so what they're proposing is that this building would be a entirely 100% commercial building with no housing at all. That's what's proposed. However, I've got to say something here, is that in the past, this developer has filed plans and then ultimately changed the plans. So, you know, it's unclear whether that's going to happen, especially considering that, you know, this 200 feet from Lexington Avenue almost is they're considering to be vacant. So it's not clear whether this is a real filing or not, but it is a filing. There are other good development sites I'm pointing out between 2nd and 3rd. And when I mean good, I don't mean that the building there's a problem with the building that's there. It's just that it's underbuilt and that a developer could build a much bigger building on the site. And so we have between 2nd and 3rd, between Lexington and Park, between Lexington and Park again on the other side of the street. We still have a vacant lot over here on 5th Avenue. I'm going to point a couple of these out. You're going to be hearing about the 212 East 125th Street, the Metropolitan Community Church site. They have a filing in with the Department of Buildings as well. So that's what's going to be coming, or at least that's what the regulations are calling for. And I now then have a few slides in here about planning considerations. And I think there's some fair questions to be asked, is will this change actually come? And, you know, what does COVID-19 and the coronavirus and our lockdown do to real estate in New York City? Is this something to even be talking about right now? And I'm going to actually give you my opinion on that, is that the best planning and zoning, especially in New York, has seemed to have happened at times when when the foot is off the gas on the real estate market, because then you can actually spend time thinking and planning about the future as opposed to responding to things that are happening right now. So I encourage everybody who's interested in planning and zoning is to say, you know, this is a good time to actually be talking about things like this, if you're capable of doing it. Okay, and then, you know, it's also fair to say some of these projects have been in the works for 10 or 15 years. The 125 in Park is, again, it was rezoned in 2004. The big substantial sites over on 2nd Avenue and 126, they were rezoned in 2008, and not much has happened. Why is that? And I think it's reasonable to talk to about some of the impediments to development along the corridor. The M35 bus, I learned about the M35 bus from community board members who talked about this as being an issue in the area. So the M35 bus is the MTA's shortest route. It goes from 125 to Randall's and Ward's Island in Lexington, 125 in Lexington. It primarily provides transportation for the residents of the men's shelter, homeless shelter on Ward's Island, and brings them essentially to the subway 125 in Lex. I've read articles that close to 1,000 homeless men use this bus every day. I don't know what it's like now. It may be very different from that now. And then many of these services, are provided in the neighborhood for these people that come and use these services. You have treatment facilities, training facilities, you have all kinds of facilities and services that are located in the neighborhood. Now, one of the things I like to say is that it hasn't always been like this. And I think it's good to remind ourselves that before 2008, the main long-term homeless for men was in this building that's shown right here, which is in Orange County, New York, about 50 miles north of New York City. It's amazing. The building is still standing. It's still there right now. All the windows are smashed out of it. And direct buses used to run from the Port Authority. So the long-term homeless men would stay here. Some of them would come back to the city and then go back in the evening. Many of them would stay there permanently. I know a lot about this site. If anybody ever wants to have a conversation offline about it, it's an amazing 160-acre site. It's beautiful, but it's still empty. And many of the issues that of homelessness that we now see on 125th Street, well, those people, the issues were mostly around the Port Authority 15 years ago, because there was no long-term facility, or at least it wasn't as big as it is now. So, planning considerations. Current zoning is a hodgepodge, right? As I mentioned earlier, there's no uniform form. And much of it is in the optional Bloomberg era inclusionary housing. So back then, we didn't have mandatory inclusionary housing. We had optional inclusionary housing, where you get an FAR bonus for giving affordable housing. Bonuses are not given for commercial uses, even in commercial districts. And it can make these substantial mixed buildings where you want to do a 50-50 building difficult. Though if you just want to do ground floor commercial, it's a pretty reasonable solution. And then in terms of the consistent regulatory vision for 125th Street, going from east to west, the zoning changes from M11 to M12 to R72 to C63 to C44D to C64 to C47, back to C44D, and then to C44A. And these were mapped in 9 different actions over the years. I actually couldn't believe it when I went through and I inventoried this, because normally places when they're, most of New York City has never been rezoned since 1961. And if it has been rezoned, it's been rezoned once, maybe twice. But there were 9 separate actions that occurred along this corridor over the years to create this kind of patchwork quilt of different zoning districts, and not to mention anything about the special districts that are there as well. And so the question is, for people who are interested in the area, would more uniform zoning be appropriate to implement a vision? And if so, what should the vision be, and what should the zoning be that would do it? Another planning consideration, and this one's a little bit out of left field, but important, I think, is the East Harlem Urban Renewal Plan will expire at the end of 2020. It's been in place for decades. In 2008, when the EDC did the East 125th Street rezoning, this form was implemented through the Urban Renewal Plan and not a special district, which is very unusual. Normally, if we have a form, we create a special zoning district to require it. In this case, we didn't. It was just a C63 district, and the form was required through the Urban Renewal Plan. So if the Urban Renewal Plan expires at the end of the year, instead of a form that looks like this, you could do towers that are very tall, like 500 feet. Because with the expiration of the plan goes away the regulations on the forms of the buildings. And the question for you all is that okay? I mean, if you have towers, you might very well have more open space. And because the buildings are in the air, as opposed to being this kind of close to ground, more contextual form. I should also say this because, you know, I'm on record of saying that, you know, urban renewal plans are the thing of the past and we should get rid of them all. And because they're very powerful, right? So what urban renewal plans do is they allow the city to take property and implement a vision that is not necessarily community-based. And it makes, it's not like the city, I think, has a plan to do that, or at least they did when they were considering this over here, and there is a long condemnation court battle. But you wouldn't be able to do that, that condemnation in the first place if it weren't for the urban renewal plan. So urban renewal plans are very powerful. They allow the city to do a lot of things, and this one's going to expire, and you know, it's a big open question on whether it should or not. And so, you know, we went through the form of the building, and I think in terms of planning considerations is the very first one is this the future you want? The corridor has great transportation access, and it's only going to get better. So, you know, from traditional planning principles, that is probably a good place to have density. Most, if not all, the new residential development is going to have at least some affordable housing. Is it enough? What about the mix of residential versus non-residential? In most of these districts, that's really up to the developer. It's not a requirement to have more or less residential versus non-residential. These commercial districts are very flexible. I think it's also fair to ask the question is, can this area handle 6,000 more households? What about essential services like schools and daycare? Remember, what I'm showing you, what we've gone through is all stuff that can be done as of right now. And we've already analyzed the impacts for these, right? And so, you know, is there going to be more needed to provide the necessary services for the people here? It's not only schools and daycare, but it's parks and open space, transportation. And, you know, the basic question is does the area need a comprehensive vision, or is it developing as planned and desired? And that's all I have. You know, I really just wanted to put this together to show what's on tap and to ask you all if this is the future you're all looking for.
Okay. George, I want to thank you very much for that presentation and all of the work you did putting that together. You know, particularly the Google Map overlay, you know, the visual representation of development in the corridor really does pop out when you have a visual tied to it. So I just want to thank you once again for that information. I'm going to open it up to the committee for questions. I just want to remind the committee, if you do have a question, please raise your hand in the chat. Angel will call on you. Just identify yourself and also advise who your question is for. Angel?
There are no hands raised as of yet.
Okay, we'll give the committee a minute.
I don't have a raise hand thing that I can see.
It's at the bottom of the panelist list.
Okay, we have the first raised hand by Jessica Morris.
Okay, Jessica?
Thanks, Angel, Steve, and George. My question, for clarification, 1968 was when the urban renewal plan was first put into, was first approved. Is that right, George?
Gosh, I don't know when it started, but it would have been in the 60s, or it would have, that sounds about right. Could have been 60, 65 or earlier.
Okay, and so in projecting out to a 2020 expiration date, I think Angel, you may have placed a copy in our files, and it looks like it's been amended a number of times over the years, but that 2020 for an expiration date is a pretty significant thing for a governing document in a place. So I don't know what that means. And you know, I guess to not be surprised towards the end of the year when that happens, I would be curious to better understand, you know, what that either process for extending would be, or if the thing just sort of dissolves and goes away. But my question is more for, it's an open-ended question, and for one of our fellow committee members, Mel Farah, who I know chairs the Economic Development and Culture Committee, which has had some conversations around some of the activity along 125th Street. If Mel has any thoughts or comments on this so far. So those are my two questions.
Well, okay, just on the urban renewal plan, to amend the urban renewal plan is not a small deal, and to change the expiration date is an amendment. It's a ULURP action, so it would have to go through ULURP to amend it, to extend it. It was last extended in 2008 when the rezoning went into effect. So when that East 125th Street rezoning happened, they amended the urban renewal plan to include all the urban design controls that were part of that rezoning, and to extend it. And so it had probably been into effect for 25 or 30 years by then, if not longer. And I think it was an arbitrary number. It was 12 years ago in 2008, and they said, well, how long do we need it before this area develops? And that was probably, they said 12 years, yeah, it'll surely be developed by then. I think it was about as much thought that went into the date that they chose.
And then maybe just one more comment in bringing this to the table at the Environment, Parks, and Open Space Committee last week. One of our public members brought to our attention that We Act had done a community visioning action plan for East 125th Street not too long ago. Though having looked at it, it is hyper-focused around the sort of Park Ave, Lexington, and 3rd Avenue intersection with 125th Street. So what happens east of that is sort of not necessarily been considered.
Yeah, I haven't seen that myself. I would love to have included it in here as well.
Steve, I could add one more thing on this question. We do know that HPD intends to come and present to this committee next month in regards to that urban renewal plan.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, thank you for your questions, and George, thank you for the responses. There's a copy of that visioning report that I believe Jessica shared with us. We'll recirculate that back to the committee and to you, George, for review.
Great.
Do we have any other members of the committee that have questions?
I got a question. So, George, thank you for that presentation. One, has this presentation been circulated to the board members? And if not, can we get it circulated to the board as a good amount of information?
I mean, it certainly hasn't, because I just made the final edit about a half an hour ago. So I will get the final version to Angel, and he can do with it as he normally does.
Right. And in the presentation, George, you know, just to add to the conversation, you know, we should talk about the landscape that's currently in the corridor. Of course, many people already are aware of, you know, the fact that the corridor has an immense issue with, you know, certain programs that are on, substance abuse and treatment programs that are on. We had a meeting yesterday with Health and Human Services of more more drug treatment and abuse services that are looking to come online within that corridor. One presenter at the committee mentioned that there was, for example, the Lee building, which you pointed out in your presentation, that's actually has currently 6 floors that are vacant, and there may be many of those type of programs that are seeking to get space in that building specifically and along the corridor. So there's nothing mentioned here at all. To some of it, I know some referencing here regarding the 1,000 homeless. I see this popping up on the chart right now, but maybe something along the lines of language that can help mitigate this issue, being that this is such an elaborate and comprehensive presentation. Maybe we should add that into this, George.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's fair. I mean, you know, the question is you know, the basic thing is that we have a bus that provides transportation to this location for 1,000 homeless men every day. So we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of these facilities want to locate in this area. And so, you know, so the question is, you know, should this bus be just the shortest route? You know, can it travel farther so that these people could be, you know, spread out to different areas, and so that the services could be spread out as well? I think it's a very fair question, and we could absolutely get into it. It's a whole presentation by itself, but we can add to it for sure.
Thank you.
The next 2 raised hands are Elsie Encarnacion and then Danilyn Arciaga.
Okay, Elsie?
Hey, good evening.
Hello, Elsie.
Hi. I guess my question was about the vision and the plan. I know you mentioned that there were a ton of rezonings and everything had their own vision, and you were thinking about maybe having a unified vision. And I know that happens often in other communities. Obviously, 125th Street is kind of run by different council members and different districts and different community boards as it goes along that strip. So I'm assuming that has something to do with kind of like this breakup of different visions. And so my question is, how do you see that vision, or maybe do you know of other communities that have a similar makeup in that kind of a span of blocks? How do they come up with a vision that's unified, and like where does that come from? Is it necessarily council pushing it, community pushing it? I know there has to be a bid on 125th Street. Like how do we get there to a unified vision?
I think that's a great question. And I'm biased. I'm going to tell you what I think. And other people will say something different. But you know, I think that I'm a big believer in community planning. I'm a big believer in community boards that are proactive and try to do their own planning and try to get their own zoning. And I think if you sit around and you wait for the Department of City Planning or your council member or somebody else, I think you're going to be disappointed because you're never going to get what you want. And I think if you know, I'm asking these questions to the community board in terms of like, is this the vision you want? And if you don't think it's the vision you want, then you know, I would encourage the community board, however you decide, to develop a vision for this area, and develop a consensus amongst its members, amongst your constituents, to do community planning at its best. You know, I think the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan was a fantastic effort that brought together many, many, many people. And if there is a place that you're going to do community-based planning, it would be Harlem. It would be here. So my opinion in terms of answering your question is that if there is consensus among community board members that there should be a vision here and that this is important enough for you all to spend your valuable time on it, then you should work together to develop that vision internally and with your fellow neighbors.
I completely agree. Thank you. I think there was something, looking at all of my notes. No, for now, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, LC, for your question. George, thank you. We have Denny Lynn.
Hi. This isn't really particularly a question. It's more so just an out loud thought to sort of meditate and reflect upon. But in re-echoing Vinny's comment about the human services meeting, it's not so much that it's not so much that addiction related facilities are relocating here, but that in the first presentation that the East Harlem neighborhood has historically been medically redlined. And so, you know, when there was a lot of public members and it was a very contentious debate and dialogue. And so I agree, George, with you when you say wanting to be a community board that is proactive as opposed to reactive and just responding to plans or visions that come our way. Again, this is just sort of thoughts out loud, but to also re-echo something that Angel had said to the community board a few months ago about really determining what programs we want to see, especially like located on the street level where a lot of pedestrian and public life happens. I think it's something that this board should really consider, because when we're having a presentation at the Human Services meeting about putting another addiction-related facility there, you know, it's like, I would have loved to have interjected and say, well, you know, coming from the land use and planning committee, we really feel like these programs would be best used for A, B, and C for so-and-so community. That's all, it's just comments.
I think they're good comments.
Thank you, Denny Lynn. Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay.
We have two questions from the public. The first, Isabel Abreu, and then Warren James.
Okay. Isabel?
Hi, everybody. I'm not hijacking this meeting. But I want to say, first, the question was that if this was going to be shared, and that was answered before. And then just a comment that I really appreciate that George James mentioned about urban renewal, how it's always not great for everybody and how we must be vigilant, because for many people, since urban renewal was, and the phrase was like put into law, has really been the displacement of poor people. So urban renewal for many communities is actually poor people removal. And so I'm happy to see that that consideration is there, because sometimes people connect the renewal with progress, progress with urban renewal for poor people, it's actually doesn't really exist many times, and so just for us to, just to say thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Isabel. Warren James.
Hello.
Hey, Warren.
Warren James, architect and planner in East Harlem. I had a question, two questions. One was for George James. And after this thorough analysis of the existing conditions, it is clearly a very hodgepodge, fragmented mishmash unfortunately, and that's the existing zoning. And if it stays the way it is, we're going to end up with a hodgepodge, mishmash, disjointed corridor. So in light of that, I'm in favor, and I would recommend the business of envisioning or designing the corridor from Fifth Avenue to the East River so that it begins to comb these things and make them more consistent. I'm also thinking that it would be relevant to look at comparables. 125th Street, river to river, and with the transportation connections that exist and will be coming, it is comparable to 14th Street, river to river, or 23rd Street, river to river. And I can assure you that if we look at the zoning across those corridors, it's far more consistent, more cohesive. So my question to George is, could there be a study or just a brief comparable side-by-side analysis of looking at 125th the way it is with, for example, 14th Street and 23rd Street, so that we can see that you can have a more cohesive corridor? Is that possible?
Oh, of course. Yes, of course that's possible. But one of the things I would add to that is that planning is not zoning and zoning is not planning necessarily, right?
Correct.
Zoning is a tool to implement a plan. And so, I would be, while I would agree that it's a hodgepodge and it's going to end up being a real mismatch, but yeah, I wouldn't presume that that's not a vision. Like that's not what I would prefer people to come up with a
we're losing George
vision
to technical
for
difficulties. We'll give him a few seconds to come back.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. And so there should be a community-based vision in there for this. But in terms of the technical side of like doing a zoning analysis of like what 14th Street looks like versus what 23rd Street looks like and what 125th Street looks like, that's relatively trivial for sure.
Well, I respectfully disagree with that, but I think it's a guidance that can help us see how it's been done successfully in other instances in Manhattan. The other point I want to bring out, because I just saw it a couple of days ago, the Apple Bank structure, which is on 125th Street between Park and Lex, closer to Lex, is now vacant. And it is landmark quality. And I'm wondering if this is the committee or can CB11 take a look at that building as a possible landmark designation?
So I can answer that. Yes, this would be the appropriate committee.
Okay, so I'm here proposing that this particular building be looked at is the Apple Bank, currently vacant. It is on the south side of 125th Street, almost to the corner of Lexington, between Lex and Park.
Yep, very familiar.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are my comments for today.
Thanks, Val. The next two questions are back on the committee side. First with Denelyn Arciaga and then with Jessica Morris. Denelyn?
I was just going to say in reference to Warren's comments, at least it's my opinion that the reason why the 14th Street corridors and the 23rd Street corridors are so cohesive is because they're actually business improvement districts, where the 14th Street corridor is actually New York State's first improvement district with the 14th Street Partnership, which has also been contentious. And I feel like a lot of our constituents in this community would be opposed to that because they have completely removed any sort of small local businesses in lieu of huge corporate commercial buildings that then end up becoming overtaken. And anyway, could be a whole other side conversation, but I just wanted to interject to that statement.
The next hand up is Jessica Morris.
To circle back, I think the hope, George, was that your presentation would start a conversation and recognize that there's some work to do if as a committee and as a board we wanted to do it. I think some of the vital essential issues throughout the district plug into some of the sets of issues that Danilin just brought up now, that Vinny brought up a bit ago with the human services component. And I think to potentially use this place as an opportunity to better understand how our district might uniquely solve some of these challenges or propose to identify pathways, whether it's through zoning or through other types of recommendations in the public realm or at the ground floor level or through the types of mechanisms that happen with partnerships and maintenance agreements, along with other types of services, service provision exchanges for community-based organizations as retail is going to struggle in its trajectory over the next 5-10 years in understanding what that means in a city like New York, but in a neighborhood like East Harlem. Sometimes your biggest problem can become your most essential asset. So to see if there's not an opportunity here that we're overlooking by recognizing the potential problems and seeing if there's a way to consider collectively how those problems can perhaps become catalysts for solutions that have larger effects. I know Diane is on the call and she's involved in a lot of the really great work that's catalyzed around Park and 125th Street. And I think that energy and investment, community-based interest can be contagious in a good way. And I would encourage us to work together to try and harness that and see it extend with as much understanding and intention as we as a community board are able to sort of provide for it.
Okay, we are closing in on 1 hour. We have one question each from both the public and our committee member. Angel?
So Delana Arciaga, and then we'll go to the public and Connie Lee.
No, I'm sorry. The second time I raised my hand was for a totally different comment, and then I thought about what Warren's was. So I apologize for.
No worries. Connie
oh wait, no, I did have something.
Oh, too late now.
Come on, you all know I barely talk. No, I just wanted to say, so the East Harlem Neighborhood Vision Planning book that was like over 100 pages, the PDF. I don't have it with me where I'm located, so I can't reference it. But I don't know, George. I don't know, George, if you're familiar with that. But based on what you know, and based on that community resource, which is a wonderful existing body of work from over, I think, like dozens of community board members and affiliations, or of the East Harlem affiliations. Do you know how similar, or like what the comments were from that book in terms of like what's going on now with your presentation?
Well, so yeah, and I reviewed it in anticipation of this, and it is surprisingly quiet about specifics on 125th Street. And that's largely because there was so much other stuff going on. There's the EDC effort with the burial ground. There was still the 2008 rezoning. And so it focused on other areas. And so while I think some of the general concerns and comments are applicable, there isn't much specifically about 125th Street here. It's surprising.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is from Connie Lee. Connie?
Connie Lee?
Hold on, give me a sec, Connie.
Sure.
All right, I think it
Oh, there
popped
you are.
up, so you should have
Yeah,
it.
we
now.
can hear you.
Okay,
You're on.
all right, so very quick comment before I ask a question. Thank you, Warren James, for the recommendation of Apple Bank. Landmark East Harlem has looked at it, but it's a good suggestion. We'll look at it again, and that is something we could do, is research whether or not it could be landmarked. The question I have may be very premature for George. The MTA, the subway, the 2nd Avenue subway, the entrance is east of Park Avenue. Is there an opportunity, and I know Durst is definitely interested in putting a subway entrance west of Park Avenue or on the other side of the street, which I think would help draw foot traffic for the small business retailers we'd like to see there?
I think it's a good question. It's something that haven't given any thought to. I know that Angel, isn't there a committee looking at the 2nd Avenue subway? Is this a recommendation that could come out of that?
I'm sorry, I looked away for a second. Remind me.
Does the community board have a committee working on the 2nd Avenue subway?
Yes, our Public Safety and Transportation Committee.
So perhaps the idea of an additional or separate or moved entrance could be something that they could consider, and it could maybe come out of that committee.
Certainly, and that committee would be working with this one, as there's still an unresolved question in terms of like what space the MTA will be taking from those development sites.
Right. But I think, listen, it's hard to deal with the MTA, Connie, as you probably know. But if there's a recommendation that comes out of like if the community board decides to do some sort of planning exercise here, especially if it's a well-considered recommendation that has community support, they will listen. They won't necessarily act on it, but they will listen. And it all depends on, if it's feasible and the engineering that's involved. And if that's one of the recommendations that come out of this, then I think, or that's done by one of the other committees as well, that's something that they would have to pay attention to.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll take it up with them.
There has been a report released, Connie, by Ascendant, and I'm happy to share that with you. That
yeah, I've seen it.
You have, okay. So it identifies the ancillary buildings with potential housing, which George, I don't think you had in your presentation, but that is an additional sort of bulk component of the development in the corridor.
Yes.
Stephen, the next question is back in the public side, Marina Ortiz.
Okay, Marina?
Yes, hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, hi,
yes.
Marina.
Okay, so, yeah, what Connie said, but also, I think, well, the presentation didn't include anything about the 2nd Avenue subway or even Metro North. And the consideration or suggestion that you all should study and come up with a new plan, I think it's a bit premature because we actually don't know much about what's happening with the 2nd Avenue subway. And knowing the city the way it works, anything can change. And also this economy, there's just so much going on. And I think it's a bit premature. Oh, and I wanted to ask, is the executive committee meeting where you're going to decide on everything going to be made public as well? You all are voting, the executive committee, rather than a full board meeting, right? You're having an executive committee to vote on whatever resolutions come out of all of the committees this month. My
Correct.
question, will that executive committee be available to the public?
Yes, absolutely. All meetings of the community board, whether they're the full board or any committee, including the executive committee, are always open to the public.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating in this discussion. Once again, I want to thank George for putting together the presentation. Just to reiterate, you know, I believe what we can take out of this. Number one, it sparked a dialogue, an important dialogue that relates back to the impacts of development in this particular district and in our district as a whole, but with 125th in mind. Secondly, you know, there's a few buckets we've created here in terms of, you know, follow up and next steps, right? There's development that's slated, development that's possible. There's the impacts of the budget on that development. There's the discussion of the urban renewal plan, both the pros and cons to such a plan, and density with, you know, close to 6,000 units being brought into the area. This discussion touches base on just about every committee, in addition to land use. So I would like our committee to just take a few necessary next steps. Number one, review the presentation completely. Take the time to review the presentation that George James put together. Jot down thoughts, ideas, you know, concepts of, you know, next steps. Dump them into the shared drive. Let's continue to promote an ongoing dialogue and see what shapes. Secondly, I'm just going to ask that we follow up this conversation in June. We'll be in touch with the committee with any updates. There were some great recommendations from the public, which we definitely want to incorporate to our ongoing discussions. And lastly, anytime we talk about big picture urban planning and design, it's very common for there to be a lot of work done, a lot of conversations had, but the very people we seek to serve may feel or be left out. It goes back to this ongoing discussion of responsible planning. So it's something, you know, I want us to continue to consider. You know, for as many meetings as we have, with as many as attendees as we have, you know, 44 participants in a discussion is not nearly enough to gauge an accurate depiction of the benefits to the people that we serve. So just please keep that in mind as you generate any ideas or action items moving forward. Moving on, we have an application for voluntary inclusionary housing. The proposed development is on 212 East 125th Street. There are no action items for this particular application. As many of you should recall, we have sort of made it a habit to ask developers that are, you know, developing as of right projects within our district to come in and talk about it. You know, if you're going to build in our district, if you're going to, you know, put, you know, residential or commercial facilities in the district, you know, the public deserves to know about it. We'd love to know, you know, what the impacts would be, what type of inclusion there will be in terms of, you know, affordability levels, local hiring, so on and so forth. So we do have Brenda. Is that correct, Brenda? I don't want to mispronounce your last name, but please join us for the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Brenda Slakowski. I work for Sidon and Shine. My boss Alvin is here as well. Michael Hakimian is the representative of ownership, and he's really going to be doing most of the presenting. So I'm just going to hand it over to Michael.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great.
Okay, speak up a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this better?
Not really, you said two words, but go ahead.
Hold on, let me try something else. Hey, can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, wonderful. So my partners and I are really excited about this development on 125th Street. As Brenda mentioned, it's a voluntary inclusionary. It's going to host 20% of the units are going to be affordable. They're going to be at 80% of the AMI, which is the area median income. And with everyone's permission, I'll just jump right in. I'm going to share my screen to show you some of the things. So George got the drop on me. He shared this with you sooner than I could. This is a rendering of the project. It's going to host 45 units, of which 13 are affordable. The ground floor is going to host a residential entrance over to the east or the left of the page, bottom, and followed by about 60 feet of commercial space at the ground floor. Second floor and up will host residential units. Just tell me if you've seen enough. I'll just share with you everything we have, and you can tell me what you do and want to see. Just to share with you, here's a cellar floor plan, and I'll show you some typical floor plans. But basically, we're going to have a nice residential lobby coming into a large amenity space. Here's the L-shaped commercial with some outdoor use. We're hoping to get a nice restaurateur in the building, and I'll have some indoor-outdoor dining, hopefully, if things go well. Second floor and up is hosting some pretty traditional floor plans, elevator, stairs, and the apartments facing 125th Street and the rear yard, facing 124th. The roof will host a common area for the residents for market and affordable tenants alike. It'll have indoor-outdoor space with a kitchenette, handicap accessible bathrooms, viewing onto 125th Street. Here are some elevations. I know you saw the render. And here's an additional rooftop on the floor above. It features sort of like a wedding cake setback. There's some height restrictions, as was mentioned, due to the urban renewal plan. It limits the height. So there's a little bit of a wedding cake design and interesting things you've seen on the facade. But a larger terrace on the top floor. Again, all residents will have access to this amenity as well. Here's an architectural depiction of the front. It's not necessarily cookie cutter design. It's showing sort of a staggered design by ND Architects. And here's the rear elevation, which the residents will see from the rear yard. The first floor will have walkout stairs and a ramp into the backyard. I have more detail on some of the underwriting and things like that. I'm not sure how far in detail the community board wants to go or is interested, but at this point I want to field any questions that anybody might have for the project. I'm going to ask the moderator to field them. I don't really have the capability to see the hand raising, if there are any questions from them.
Certainly, we'll let you know.
All right, at this time, we'll open it up to questions from the committee.
Our first question is from Carly Wine and then Elsie Encarnacion.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your presentation. In the summary that you sent over, it says that construction was to begin in April 2020. So I just had a question about the status of construction in lieu of COVID-19. What, if any, delays you're expecting? Yeah, that's my first question. I have a few, but.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the city is allowing for essential sites to continue construction work. An essential site is deemed, I believe, any site that's essential to New York City business residents, and any development that hosts affordable housing units. I think that our status of being essential really is contingent on the regulatory agreement being signed, and I think, you know, the HPD is going to look forward to a letter, hopefully, from this community board endorsing a project and saying they have no objection. You know, if and when that happens, I think we'll apply for essential construction and hopefully break ground sometime in June. If not, I guess we'll have to wait for Governor Cuomo to give the lead on relieving restrictions on all non-essential construction and business in the city, at which point we will commence.
Just to jump in there, Michael, technically this project is considered essential. We just have to get the proof from PD because we haven't gotten to the point of signing that regulatory agreement. So had we been further along in the process, we would have gotten that essential construction and we would have completed a little bit. It just didn't apply soon enough further in the process before COVID.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay, Elsie.
The next two questions are from Elsie Encarnacion and Vinny Torres.
Wait, Carly, did you have other questions? I know you said you had one.
You go now, and then
We'll circle back.
I'll see where we're at. Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed that you had mentioned, good evening, by the way, that 20% of the units were 80% of AMI, but did you give us the total number of units?
Yeah, the total number of units is 45 apartments. I'll screen share the unit distribution mix. So it's host to 45 apartments, 13 of which will be inclusionary. They're slated to be dispersed on every single floor. You know, I think the requirement was set vertically to integrate them on 70% of the floors. We opted to go for 100% of the floors to give them a better spread.
Okay.
And it's a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms.
Okay, and were the rents already calculated for that, being that you know the AMI now?
We had an AMI rent for 2019. I think they just changed in 2020. I don't know if we have the update. Give me a moment to take a look through.
And these are tax credit units?
Could you repeat the question?
Are they tax credit units?
No, these are not tax credit units. These units are voluntary inclusionary. We benefit from a 20% larger building for constructing them, but there's no tax benefit to these units.
And just to clarify, this is entirely privately financed. There's no government subsidy here, so there was no tax credits.
No tax credit, but you are getting a larger envelope to build on. Because
That's
you
correct.
provide these units. There is a benefit.
That's what inclusionary is all about. So that's why.
Right, that's the benefit.
Right, correct.
Thank you.
Here's the schedule of rents for those units. Studios are just shy of 1,600. 1 bedrooms are 1,700, and the 2 bedrooms are 2,000. And this is assuming that the tenants do not pay utilities. That's we pay the utilities.
Thank you.
Sure.
Vinny Torres is next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Angel. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about the construction aspect of the project. It seems that there's been permits filed, so some of the questions would be, do you have a construction manager, general contractor on board as of this point? I'm assuming the answer is yes. Who is that? Who may that be? Also, is the project going to adhere to prevailing wages, or is it going to be a non-prevailing wage project? Is it going to have union contracts with union jobs, or is it going to be a non-union construction project? And of those workers on the project, as it relates to workforce development, what's the community outreach plan? local workforce development plan to ensure that local hiring is taking place. What is the approach on that, being that permits already, filed and you're looking to break ground and just, sooner than later?
Yeah, Vinny, thanks for your question. I first want to say that I'm a big fan. I dialed in early and you came on with tremendous energy and a lot of excitement, and you made it a lot of fun from the beginning. So it's something I'm going to try to bring to my Zoom meetings as well. Yes, so you're correct. We did file permits for foundations. We're looking to a boutique contractor named KSK Construction. They do developments on or about this size. They've done other developments in the area. This project's a bit small for the unions. It's going to be non-union construction. Obviously, I think it makes sense to use KSK's known and vetted subcontractors. That being said, I think that when it comes time for general labor, skilled and unskilled, I mean, those are traditionally sourced from locally and word of mouth and things like that. So I think we're going to definitely reach out to the community board and ask if they can help us put up flyers and with hand in hand with KSK to see if there's any available hands to come in for the skilled and unskilled labor on the non-union project.
So obviously there doesn't seem to be goals or requirements in place as it relates to local hiring, which to me really sends off a red flag. Michael, if you want to really come into the community here and be a good neighbor, and this type of development, although it may not be a sizable project, as you mentioned, that may warrant unions to get involved, even though I'll contradict that. There are many sites smaller than yours right now that the unions are involved with. Not that I'm advocating for a union in any way, but if you look at some of the neighboring projects in that direct vicinity or across the street from you, within blocks away from you, the East Harlem Parcel B project that's across the street from you, the BDG Department of Motor Vehicles project, Gotham Residential, that's across the street from you, and many other projects that are right in the immediate vicinity. Many of them have really put together a comprehensive plan to ensure community hiring that entails outreach, marketing, workforce training and development, job placement services, and many others. For you guys to come on board right now and have zero at hand and just leave it to your GC, KSK to bring on their already vetted subcontractors, to bring on their already employees that they have employed, really doesn't seem like there's going to be a viable opportunities for people from the local community seeking employment opportunity that can be granted and afforded to them by this project. So as it relates to a community benefit in that sense, I would urge you guys to really take a hard look at that and see what can be done. Look at some of the other neighboring projects to see what they've done with a lot of success and see if you can implement that on this project.
Thank you, Vinny. I think it's a great suggestion. To be sure, the permits that are filed right now are sort of a general one. The subcontractors have not been assigned an award to this project yet. We're open to any and all subcontractors, locally or not locally, who might be interested. But I think your suggestion is a very good one. I think we'll ask a lot of the local developers who they've used from some of the local projects, definitely get some recommendations from them as well, and make an earnest effort to do local hiring, if not for the constructed and stabilized projects with respect to doormen, supers, and the long-term jobs, and at least for the short-term in the construction like you're talking about. So I definitely appreciate the suggestion, and we're going to start reaching out immediately.
Thank you. Just to add to that, just quickly, Michael, also, MBE or LBE participation, right? There are many minority business enterprises, MBEs and LBEs, locally based business enterprises that can be good partners on that project that can work with GC, maybe a carpentry outfit or a plumbing outfit or electrical outfit. It's not a big sizable project. I'm sure there are many local entities, minority entities that can, you know, that are qualified and can do the job. You guys should have some type of MBE type of program in place, because if you don't do it and require that from your GC or some of your subcontractors that can give out maybe sub-tier or third-tier contracts, it's not going to happen. It has to come from you. You're the developer. You guys are holding all the cards. If you want it to happen, it's going to happen.
Vinny, anecdotally, I'll just tell you, I had one project. It's not technically required in this project. I did have one project where MWB is required. I bid it out. Not only did I award it to an MWB electrician, he is now my favorite electrician. I'm trying to push him onto this job as well. He is both minority and women business owned. So I'm all for bidding to MWBE. We have some on the list already, and I will certainly look into that further as well.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, Stephen, our next three are Jessica Morris, Danielin, and Jessica Elliott.
I'll try and keep it brief. Thank you. Stephen, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Angel. Michael, I just wanted to follow up. We did provide you a copy of our checklist. The last attachment on the checklist includes our local hiring guidelines for your review. Please review. Vinny, I want to thank you for your recommendations. And also on this call, on this meeting, is our Economic Development Committee Chair, who's been a champion for small businesses and local small business participation. So I encourage the continued dialogue. Thank you. Do you have another question?
So first, I think it's not every month that we get to review a voluntary inclusionary housing project. That's something that I've been on the board a short period of time, but it's the first time I've seen that. Is it the first time you've built in the East Harlem district?
This is our first construction project in the East Harlem district. We have done, just to be sure, my family has been involved in residential and commercial construction for 40 years. So we've seen a wide range of types of construction. We've constructed primarily in Manhattan, not in this particular neighborhood yet, but we're definitely excited to get in and start building over here.
Good. It was less of a grilling question and more of a neighborly kind of welcome question. I noticed you're partnered with the Fifth Avenue Committee in some sense on the form that you submitted. Can you say more about that partnership, if at all, and what role they play in the development?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Fifth Avenue Committee, we've retained them to help source our tenants for the affordable component. Again, we have 20% of the units will host affordable units in the form of 80% AMI. So Jay over at Fifth Avenue is going to help us really reach out to find the appropriate tenants and bring them to the building.
Great. I'm sure there's more process involved in that than we need to discuss right now. The last thing I wanted to bring up is that northernmost part of our district is designated as an opportunity zone. And while markets have not been good friends in the past couple of months, I think that's a relatively short game if you're a real estate investor, but it's a long game as far as community development is concerned. So where you're investing locally at a really key corner, and what we just saw is a potential place that will continue to develop in the next decades. is there a sense of how you might have interest in potentially leveraging some of those real property assets? I know it's a significant investment already, but it's another kind of point of question. Small businesses are a small slice of the opportunity zone pie, but a small slice in a district like East Harlem can make a big difference. So I would, if you're willing to consider working with the community through those types of leveraging mechanisms, I think it's a fantastic way to give back and make connections to ensure that the place around your investment is supporting people who have been here for a very long time.
Okay, I certainly appreciate the comment. When we bought into the project, we didn't really even know what an opportunity zone was. This was in 2018, and the regulations really hadn't rolled out yet. It's nice that it is an opportunity zone project, and I think it brings a lot of promise. As far as I'm sorry, were you asking something specific of me in terms of, because I got confused because I saw something pop up on the screen. Was there a specific request or just a general note that this is a? Could you repeat the?
There is no question, Michael. I just wanted to, I know you're aware. The opportunity to take advantage of that designation with specific communities is something that is challenging to find ways to do in small yet potentially impactful ways. So I guess I'm just sort of putting a bird in the ear to if there's a way to do that in the future of your investment, it may be a great thing as you're kind of breaking ground in a new community.
Totally understood, and I appreciate that very much.
Our next, before we get to our next question from our committee members, you mentioned, mention was made of the Fifth Avenue Committee, and the question came up in the chat. Fifth Avenue Committee has a great reputation across the city, but they're Brooklyn based, and we have local organizations that do similar work. Encourage you to have the Fifth Avenue Committee reach out to the community board so that we can connect them with local organizations that do similar work to assist in the recruitment of local residents for those units.
If you don't mind, I'd like to make a comment about the marketing process.
Sure.
So we really would like to work a lot more with local not-for-profits. The problem is there's only a handful of approved marketing agents in the city that are approved by HPD. And literally there are 5 or 6 approved marketing agents. And the process involves a lottery. It's not personal selection. There will be a lottery on the HPD website, advertising, and those who are interested respond to the lottery, and then they're randomly distributed by a computer. Then you have a list of how many people apply, and Fifth Avenue Committee starts at the top. So they have to work down the lottery list to make sure that it's fair to everybody. And we would love to have more marketing agents to work with, but there's a very limited pool that HPD will allow to work on the project.
Thank you, Alvin. Yes, we're aware of the lottery process. What we're speaking to is getting the word out about the opportunity to the community, right? So that's one of the points in our affordable housing marketing guidelines, which can be done with a local organization and doesn't have to be an organization vetted by HPD specifically, that they can assist in getting the word out. Oftentimes, individuals and communities miss out on opportunities because of a lack of awareness. So sure, everyone has the ability to visit the HPD website, but not everyone gets word of it, and not everyone has access.
I agree with you completely, and that's an important function for a local community to do. If you want to have as many apartments rented to local community people, you need turnout from the community.
Yes, sir.
You'll have more people in the pool.
Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, we certainly have at least one, if not 2, organizations that are listed by HPD as housing ambassadors that can certainly be of assistance in this regard.
If you'd supply the contact information, we'd be happy
happily.
To supply
yes, sir.
that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And with that, the next question from our committee members is from Jessica Elliott or Jessica Elliott's cat.
Thanks, Angel. Thank you for your presentation. I just have 3 rapid fire questions. Following up on Candy's question, I just wanted to confirm that you will be applying for the 421A tax exemption.
Yes, we will be applying for 421A.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then sorry if I might have missed this, who will be managing the property?
We don't have a manager assigned yet. We are personally, we've been developers, builders, and managers for 40 years. I think we're potentially open to doing a new manager in this area, but it's not assigned yet.
Okay. And then my third question, just about your outdoor uses. You mentioned that there was a outdoor space on the ground floor for potential commercial use. And you mentioned 2 spaces on the roof that would be available to all residents. You also mentioned a stairway from the the second story residences to a rear yard space. It looked like on your presentation there was an additional ground floor space adjacent to the commercial ground floor space exterior.
Oh, yeah, I apologize for the lack of clarity. It's one contiguous space in the rear. The residents will have access to a part of the rear yard, and the commercial tenant will have access to a part of the rear yard. It's one and the same space. It steps down off the first floor. The backyard is 3 or 4 foot lower elevation than the ground floor currently, and we intend to keep it that way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. We have one more question from the committee. Candy? Candy, unmute your mic.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Put the lights on.
It's getting dark now. Thank you for the presentation. And Michael and Alvin, since you're coming in first to East Harlem, this is your first project coming in here. Welcome, but also I don't think you did your full homework about representatives in this community, and it's disappointing to hear the way Alvin discussed that. I'm familiar with the Fifth Avenue, but East Harlem also likes to like the way Vinny was discussing. Local hiring is important just as well as working with local community-based organizations, and we do have the housing ambassadors, which we're one of them, and so is a few other members of our board, including our chair. So I just feel like if you're gonna do this, and we want to see a majority of our members of residents of East Harlem to make sure that they have opportunities to get into your building as much as is at 80% AMI. My thing is that I would like to see that immediately you do contact in good faith and as a good neighbor with the community board and show and demonstrate that you really want to work with us, especially with the housing piece, and making sure that marketing really goes out and that it becomes a success, that we can see that the residents of East Harlem are the ones that are actually benefiting as well, besides your other groups that is Fifth Avenue. Let me ask you a question. Fifth Avenue is also going to look for the other portion that are not going to be in the lottery phase, or are you using a separate marketing broker?
Yeah, the market rate units don't go through Fifth Avenue. They only handle the affordable unit.
So you got yourself a community-based organization from Brooklyn to do the marketing for East Harlem, and you're not familiar with the people of East Harlem. So I have a problem with that.
As I was trying to explain,
but I do know the process of the lottery, how that goes, and the keying into the whole process. We're familiar with that.
So the difficulty we have is, well, let me just say the positive. The positive is, I agree with what the question was raised before, and it would be great to have all local communities community representatives spread the word. When the lottery comes out, there is a lottery for this project, apply for it. That is a seriously important issue. If people don't know about it, they don't see the ads, they're not going to apply. That's the most effective work that can be done. In terms of who's in charge of the lottery, it's kind of out of our hands because there are only 5 or 6 approved agents, but that is approved by HPD. I've been doing this a long time. There's not one single Harlem-based group that's approved.
East Harlem group? I don't think so. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you on that. I do.
To my knowledge, those are the groups that are approved by HPD, and I'm not aware of that group.
That's not true.
That's not, honestly isn't. But
Okay,
I think
so
that you can have that
Tony,
conversation
Candy.
with Stephen and
Yes.
and Angel. But
Okay,
honestly, I think you really need to just take a good look at East Harlem and the people that do have a lot of qualifications. Okay.
We're not making
And
that
especially
judgment.
with the marketing, the marketing has to be done properly.
Yeah,
and then not just only by
agree.
online, okay? It just really has to be that it's visible for everyone else to see it. If you don't do it that way, not everybody has access. And now with this whole COVID issue, you really have to find a way to make it possible.
Marketing is good for everybody. It's good for the community. It's good for the developer
and
too.
I think you're losing my
because
point.
They want to rent up the apartments. You know?
You're losing my
Doesn't
point.
do-
Okay,
doesn't
guys,
do them any
listen,
good to have a
we're
marketing
gonna,
plan that nobody responds to.
I think at this point, we can agree that there's some information we're going to be sharing with you in terms of the housing ambassadors and some of our standard operating procedures that we share with developers in this community. I encourage all of the committee members to continue keeping an eye on this project, and I want to thank the developer for coming out and giving this presentation. We will share with you all of our guidelines from local hiring to marketing to anything else a member of this committee wants to share with you. Thank you. We have a question from Jessica Morris on the committee.
Sorry, I know this may be late in the game and next to impossible when you are as far along in your project as possible, but it doesn't hurt to throw out there the question of any deeper affordability. 80% AMI, those rents are still something that will be challenging for a lot of people to cop up each month. It's a voluntary inclusionary project. You're already doing above and beyond what's expected. Have you looked at whether it's possible? I noticed your, it's a nice project in the unit mix that you have, and the sort of the effort of kind of inclusion, affordability. Questions of accessibility or the potential for a few deeper units as far as the affordability matrix is concerned. Is that something you've considered or not?
So Jessica, thank you for the question. I'll tell you this, it's a fine line between affordability and development feasibility. So my partners and I looked at this, and again, you noted that it is voluntary. There was a point where we were considering skipping the inclusionary component altogether. I'm going with 100% market rate. Just due to the fact that we thought it would make for a nicer mass for the building. And the pro forma is, marginally better with the larger mass and larger amenity space, and all the residents share that benefit. We sort of voted to say, let's go with the voluntary inclusionary plan. The 80% AMI, I saw a comment pop up also that $1,500 is for a studio is difficult. To be sure, this is going to be one of the top of the line projects in the area. It's going to be a luxury building. All residents are going to share the same amenities. I think that question came up as well. On the ground floor, on the rooftop, And it's going to be, it's the difference between this affordable project and one of the, and some of the older ones that are around that maybe have 30, 40, 50% MI is that this amenity space will be so attractive that I think anybody who's within reach of this thing will be clamoring for it, hopefully, as far as the lottery goes. And to address the earlier concern as well on the lottery and going with Harlem, for me, and I think we'd have to work out the mechanics of this, but for me, the more eyes, ears, and marketing channels we have on this, the better. It's in my best interest to get this project leased up as quickly as possible with as many residents locally and non-locally as possible. But then again, as Alvin noted, Fifth Avenue is one of the HPD approved vendors, and I know that there were comments before from Candy. You know, I think we'll look into it, but if they're not recognized, I don't think we're really allowed to use them as far as HPD is concerned. But if anybody even on the board has some local suggestions for going out with local flyers and things like that, sorry, my daughter's screaming, it's bedtime. Some local suggestions for hiring, we want to get at least as quickly as possible. Please, by all means, send your suggestions, and we're happy to have them.
Okay, we have a question from the public.
Is that me, Marina Ortiz?
Yes, Marina, you're up.
Yeah, so again, yeah, the Fifth Avenue thing. I just went to a place on Park Avenue. Angel, you might know, CNC did the marketing for one of the affordable developments that's coming up, Lexington Gardens. And so that must mean that they're HPD certified. So maybe you can make that connection. I was wondering, and it's not mandated, but would you be willing to consider community set aside a certain portion of the affordable units for local residents? And then lastly, Brenda, I think it was you identified can you tell us your role at the firm? I didn't catch that when you mentioned it before.
I can also answer your beginning questions as well. I'm an associate at the law firm Seiden and Shine, and we were retained by Union to help out with the project and assist in his application process through HPD. No, HPD does publish a list of their approved administering agents. So the marketing process for an inclusionary project is a little bit different than a regular marketing process. So HPD publishes those approved administering agents who can conduct the marketing. And right now their list has, I can actually pull it up for us, it has 7 approved agents on it. And you can't really pick and choose your tenants, like Alvin said beforehand. Fifth Avenue is going to get a list of based on who puts in their name to the lottery, and that's how they have to choose their tenants. They can't choose based on where the tenant is coming from, if that answers your question.
Right, so let me supplement what Brenda had to say. And I'll repeat again, the best, if you want local tenants or local tenants to be able, local people to be tenants, you need a drive locally to apply. That's the only thing that works. Your comment about CNC, they're not on the approved list. CNC can do marketing because they're working on tax credit deals with the owner. When you're doing a tax credit deal, HFA or HDC allows an owner representative to do the marketing. So that applies to tax credit deals, but we're not a tax credit deal. So we don't have the ability to do owner marketing. That's really the difference.
Thank you.
I just have.
Thank you. Next question is from Carly Wine.
Thank you, Angel. And thank you so much for your presentation. I guess I'm not sure if other people have any questions, but just to kind of wrap up the discussion, there's been mention about local hiring and local marketing, and on your questionnaire, you mentioned the possibility of working with a local real estate broker, and you had also mentioned connecting with the community board in order to, help you identify organizations or different groups to work with in the area. And I guess I know that I've been contacting Brenda She's been my point person for this project, and my question is Brenda the appropriate person to contact moving forward in regards to connecting you with these groups?
Yeah, you can contact me anytime, and I'll just see Michael on it and make sure that he gets the information.
Great. And I will continue to be the point person for CB11. So we'll definitely be in touch with you for follow-up.
Great.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for their participation in this discussion. I want to thank the developer and their team for coming out to present this voluntary inclusionary housing application. And I just want to summarize with some key points. Being that this is your first project in the East Harlem and in our district, welcome. Number two, if you haven't been made aware, our statement of district needs has a specific line that calls out of 98,000 residents in East Harlem, those 16 years or older, 51% of them are out of the workforce. It's why we push for local hiring and local community participation. We suffer our constituents suffer from a significant amount of displacement due to as of right development to begin with. It's why we push for deeper levels of affordability and accessibility to units. Our community deserves every opportunity to know as much detail as possible about all development within the district, including as of right developments, which is why marketing is so critical. So I want to thank you once again for coming out, and we are going to move on to our next presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Please feel free to reach out either through Carly or directly. I love to have good neighbors. I want to start this relationship on the right foot, and I'm definitely looking forward to being in the neighborhood for a long time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all electronically. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Okay, moving on in our discussion. We are at the 2-hour mark. I want to thank everyone for hanging in there. I know that some of us may be spending their entire day in Zoom meetings. So thank you for your stamina. I promise you that we are doing everything possible to keep this meeting effective and efficient. Moving on, we have a discussion about 2 HPD-owned lots on Block 1815. This was brought to our Environment, Open Space, and Parks Committee. The chair of that committee, who is a wonderful member of this committee, Jessica Elliott, requested to have a discussion on this matter, as it does tie in to an anticipated development in the near future. I'm going to ask Angel to preface the discussion with that particular development coming down the pipeline. We will pass it to Jessica to give a review, and we will also have George James chime in with a visual representation to help the committee. Thank you. Angel?
Sure. So I'll be as brief as possible. So this site on 118th Street is a site owned by the city through the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, and has since 2014 been subject to an RFQ that was released by that agency for seeking proposals for the development of affordable housing, either rental or home ownership. A couple of years ago, one of the respondents to that RFQ was designated for a cluster of sites in our district, which includes this site on 118th Street. The organization is Ascendant Community Development, and they and their partners presented to our executive committee this past October the project that they intend to erect at this site, in addition to sites throughout the district. I believe in total there are 4 or 5 sites. Similarly, another cluster of sites called the Central Harlem cluster includes a site in our district on 130th Street. Many of these sites are either vacant or occupied by community gardens. For example, the Pleasant Village Community Garden operates one of the lots that's one of the HPD lots as it is adjacent to the larger preserved Pleasant Village Community Garden. In addition, this cluster also includes a community garden site on 120th Street, I believe, and Park Avenue, the Jack and Robinson Community Garden. Both of these sites have preserved segments and publicly owned non-preserved segments. A couple of years ago, after the RFQ was released, there was interest expressed by some of the gardeners from Pleasant Village for the community board to entertain requesting that this site, these lots, be taken out of consideration for development. The board did not act in that fashion. I believe that part of the reason they didn't vote in that fashion is because the board has a long-standing position of seeking sites in our district that are publicly owned to encourage the development of affordable housing. There is a finite number of such properties in our district, and the board has made that a priority to encourage the city to do this kind of development, which can include more affordable units and deeper levels of affordability as a result of them being publicly owned and there not being a cost for the purchase of the property. So several of these sites are included in the district. Most of them you'll recognize as being made part of an assemblage for a larger project, but some of these sites are to be built on separately, such as the site at Pleasant Village Community Garden. So like, again, in summation, the project that was presented by Ascendant and their development partners, which they've called Las Raíces, was presented to our executive committee this past October, and will be again presented, will be presented to Community Board 11 again at its Land Use Committee meeting in June. Recently we received, actually the Parks Committee received a request from the folks over at the Pleasant Village Community Garden to again ask that the community board support the idea of removing these sites from development. That presentation was made to the Parks Committee, and now we're here. Jessica?
Thank you, Angel. And I just wanted to say hello. I see that some of the Pleasant Village Community Garden members are in our public member audience right now. So I see Chris and Em among others, so welcome. I'm not gonna go through the entire presentation, but just to reiterate some things that from my notes, and then hopefully we can answer questions together. So Pleasant Village Community Garden is requesting a letter of support, as Angel described, to protect the HPD-owned portion of the lot being used by the garden from development into affordable housing. That lot is 505 East 118th Street, and the Las Raíces presentation that was shared in our meeting agenda, it's pages 26 through 33. So it's a 6-story, 18-unit building being proposed was proposed in 2019. The lot designated to Pleasant Village Community Garden through the Green Thumb Preservation is not to be touched. Pleasant Village Community Garden was founded in 1982. They host free events and community engagement, including food donations, neighborhood composting, and they raise chickens on the site. They have received a $10,000 grant from Building Healthy Communities through the mayor's office to address inequities and improve community health outcomes by increasing access to nutritious and affordable food, which they spoke about at length at our Environment, Open Space and Parks Committee meeting. Pleasant Village Community Garden says that they have been using the HPD lot for native plant fields and chicken coops for the past decade. And the development of the building would cause them to lose sunlight to keep up their garden production with the loss of land to development in relation to their grant from Building Healthy Communities. Yeah, so as Angel mentioned, and George can add his comments, but it's a delicate balance, I think, between preserving open space, which we also have very little of, and making sure that our organizations like Pleasant Village Community Garden, who have been in the community for decades, are able to continue supporting the community in the ways that they do, but also with affordable housing being a top concern with the community board. Yeah, I think that there's a lot to discuss here. So looking forward to George's comments, and then I'm not sure if we can open it up to Chris to say a few words if she would like.
George?
All right, so I was going to try to share my screen, but okay, good. Okay, there's only just a few slides here. Angel asked me to go through the uses on the block, just to make certain that everybody has the same information about what's happening there. So this is the block in question. It's mostly, the mid-block is mostly tenements, but East River Plaza is this enormous thing at the end. It's beautiful that 118th Street has still has cobblestones, and it's a dead-end street. The colors here represent the uses. So you have the tenements, you have some vacant areas, and you also have an industrial building still over here. The lots in question for new development is here. These two lots right here. It is adjacent to the NYC Parks parcel, which is over here. This has frontage on 119th Street and Pleasant Avenue, whereas the HPD site has only frontage along 118th Street. They abut along this small area. The park site is 3.5 times the size of the HPD site. And the HPD site looks larger because it is located right next to another vacant lot right here with that little asterisk. That site had zoning approval for a 4-story market rate building, but was withdrawn in December of 2019. It's a very, very narrow lot. It would be difficult to develop by itself.
Who owns that lot, George?
Pardon me?
Who owns that lot?
It's privately owned, but a person owns it. I mean, honestly, I looked into this because it's so small. It's a non-conforming lot, and there are lots of restrictions on what you can do on non-conforming lots because it's so narrow. It wants to be combined with the HPD site, so you could have a bigger site. But it's privately owned, and there's no way to make that happen. But it's I was looking to see if it was ever in common ownership with the lot next door to it, because if it was, then it couldn't be developed by itself. But it was never at the same time in common ownership with one of the other lots adjacent to it. That's it. I can also, I can answer questions on this, or I could also show you some other things, but I could save this for questions, give you these live. Okay.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions from the committee.
I have a question.
Raise your hand.
I have a question from Candy, then a question from Jessica.
I have a question. The site, can I speak or no? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the part that is in question, and my question is to Jessica. So the backspace where they're concerned about sunlight, what are they utilizing? What plants or what trees do they have that may be potentially threatened by shadowing because of the sunlight?
Yeah, I'm sure Chris can answer these questions better than I can, but according to my notes, those were native fields for plants that grow native in our area, as well as community composting and the prized chicken coops that, you know, help they use for with children at schools and, you know, for events, and it's a big draw for their garden.
Okay, because my thing is that if they have site control by HPD, so upon the development being done here, if they have the chicken coop in one side where there's a lot of sunlight, maybe that's where you can put the chicken coop at. I mean, I raised chickens in my own place, so I had 2 of them nicely. So and you wouldn't even tell I was raising them, you know, urbanly. But the thing is that they wouldn't really need the sunlight, if anything. So am I being properly saying just to the fact that you're looking for a lot of support to not have this project done and instead give the whole entire space to the Pleasant Village Community Garden, right?
To preserve it, I believe, under that.
To preserve it,
To preserve
right.
it for the garden.
So Candy, just to clarify, we don't have an action on this particular item.
Okay.
This is an informational presentation from an item that came before the Parks Committee.
And just to clarify, the argument being that they were notified by HPD when given the use of this land, that it was impermanent, and
Right.
that they were told, you know, a couple times that, you know, it would be potentially slated for development, right? And since then we haven't heard anything from at least the ULURP process, but that their argument is that they've been using the land for over a decade now, and that it's an important asset to the community.
Right. I mean, I am familiar with the history about the gardens being uplifted for development, and that was one of the sites, but we're talking about like more than 15 years ago, and Pleasant Village was one of them, as well as a few others. And at least they got to have their portion saved at that, you know, compared to the size that that HPD is wants their site back, you know. So I don't know.
Yeah, question. So that notice, Jessica, that you're mentioning was given to this community group over a decade ago?
I'd have to have Chris answer these sort of specific questions, but I do know that they were told, I believe at least once, maybe twice, that development was going to be occurring, but then nothing came from that. Yeah.
When you're referencing Chris, who's Chris?
Chris is I believe the president of the Pleasant Village Community Garden, and I don't want to speak for Chris, so I would encourage us to open up the conversation to hear from her.
And Angel, earlier on the presentation, you talked about the presentation that was brought in to the committee from the HPC designated developer, which I think was Ascending, you mentioned?
Yes.
And development partners. So on that and development partners, who are those other partners, and what percentages do those other partners have on Las Raíces, the Roots development project, right? This is the Roots development project. So how much of the Roots is being given to somebody else? Do we know what the percentage breakdown is, that, or ownership for this potential development site?
So that's a good question. And next month, we're going to have that development group at the land use committee, and you can ask them. I do not know the percentages of ownership amongst that grouping. but it's a good question. I did want to just add one thing to my previous comments with regards to this site, to remind the board members that not only are public sites a priority for the development of affordable housing per this community board, but also this was memorialized in the points of agreement from the 2017 rezoning, point number 13, that sought to prioritize the development of 2,600 affordable homes on publicly owned land. And it specifically includes the NIHOP/NCP RFQ clusters that I referenced earlier.
Thank you.
Sure. I believe that Jessica Morris had a question, her hand up. We'll finish with the committee members and then we'll go to the public. Folks, just be a little patient with us.
Thanks, Angel. I do have a question. I also sit on the Environment, Parks, and Open Space Committee and heard the presentation last week. I think all I can say relative to the cohesion of a community garden is that with an ecosystem, chopping off an arm really does more damage than just losing an arm. Right, that there's something that happens beyond the dissolving of that area that affects the whole. That being said, Angel, I appreciate your prehistory and reminder of what the community board and district fought so hard for over the past decades and decades before that. We're going to hear about it next month, but 18 units, 5 studios, 6 1-bedrooms, 4 2-bedrooms, 3 3-bedrooms. I'm all for creative problem solving. Is there any way to have that same number of units be developed in a place that doesn't necessarily already have such an ingrained community-oriented use? Do we have any creative tools in our toolkit to potentially not make this a win-lose situation, but a win-win situation, given the timeline that we'll have to deal with relative to development pressures from HPD and this being a cluster? I don't know, but I want to ask the question.
Can I just answer part of that question, which is that we can look to the development right across the street from my apartment, which is the Sendero Verde. It was one of the 100% affordable housing publicly owned land that the developer made a point to include community gardens that were existing in that space. And I just want to note that from the presentation that Angel circulated with us, that there is slated potentially to be a rear yard for residents and a green roof. Not that that would be publicly available, but that, looking at what developers did at 111th to 112th Street on Madison Avenue, I would bet that the answer to your question may be yes. So
just a follow-up question is to sort of put it really simply, if this is a cluster of 4 buildings throughout the district, why can't you just take one of those buildings and put it on top of the other one somewhere else? I mean, maybe that's not the thing we want to do, but Vinny, you get it. Why can't, can HPD do that? Or
they could do a variance change, but I mean, I guess you're posing it to the panel. Jessica, I think it's a good question to see if there's ways that this can be done and ways to save the community garden and still yet provide affordable housing and build new affordable housing. So this is a tough trade-off, right? That we trade off a community garden for affordable housing. And then that's just how much affordable housing is it really going to yield? And is it worth the trade-off, and how much is this garden really viable to the local community? And there's a big adjacent community park space, New York City Parks, right adjacent to this. That's, as George mentioned, 3 times the size. This is something that Angel mentioned too, is part of the points of agreement. So this is already almost, our position has already almost been solidified in this in many ways, in my opinion. But we're all just speaking out loud. I'll yield my time.
Okay. Well, thank you guys all for the dialogue. I do want to echo some of the statements that were made. You know, in terms of looking at our community and all of the conversations we've had, the actions that have come before us, the land use committee and as a board, the existence of publicly owned land is getting very slim. And in these existing lots that are scarce, our position has historically been the use for deeply affordable housing. With that said, it doesn't preclude us from incorporating concepts of inclusion or the impacts to the adjacent properties and the adjacent garden in consideration when this does come down the pike for an anticipated land use action. What I would believe would be the most effective way for us to coordinate this as a committee is to consider all of these items when it's time to weigh in on the land use action when it does come to us. We were originally told it was coming down the pike in the first quarter of 2020. Obviously, because of the pandemic, things have been suspended. We will continue to monitor this and the land use application as it comes to fruition. If there's no other questions from the committee, Angel.
Stephen, if I could if you permit me to add one more thing. I did reference that this request was made prior to the land use committee a couple of years ago. And at that moment, former chair of this committee and I had occasion to visit the community garden. And I haven't been there recently. However, it was eye-opening to see that the majority of the community garden is quite remarkable. It was also incredibly disappointing to see that one of the lots in the Pleasant Village community garden didn't resemble a community garden in any way, shape, or form. So I would be interested to know if the current preserved community garden is being used to its full to its full extent before a request is made to a request is entertained to preserve another lot on that block. So just to be clear, from my experience, and again, I'm admitting that I have not been there in the last 2 years. From my experience walking through, there is one full city lot that is part of the preserved garden that was essentially, this is my term, a clubhouse where I didn't see anything growing. And the contrast was striking to me that when we did walk into the rest of the garden, it was amazing how stuff was grown in the rest of that garden. So that the juxtaposition of the very fruitful and resplendent garden to this clubhouse lot, I think, well, not I think, but to me, struck a chord that why isn't, the existing preserved garden being used to its full utility? And that question needs to be answered before any request to use an additional set of city-owned public full city lots is entertained.
Hold on, Angel, can you tell me which is the lot you're talking about that had the clubhouse-like?
So facing Pleasant Avenue, the southernmost full lot. There's a group of individuals that repair cars in front of it. So if you've ever driven down Pleasant Avenue, you'll be familiar with it.
Oh, okay, but you're not talking about specific this lot where I was saying, but you're talking about a different lot.
No, I'm speaking to this portion that George is putting on the image now of the
This is the clubhouse.
Village Garden. Yeah.
Is this the big one that's the NYC Parks that you have listed on the mapping, George?
I'm sorry, say again?
Is this the lot that you have listed on your map that connects to that lot?
Yes. So this is the NYC Parks lot, yes.
And Green Thumb, it's Green Thumb preserved.
Yes.
All right, so, okay, I got it. So Angel, this is the one you're talking about, the club-like situation. which was the other lot? And so the lot that we're talking about now is the one you mentioned that has the, what you considered a good green community type garden setup.
Right. So the full larger area that in George's rendering was titled NYC Parks, which is a green thumb garden, is all of these lots. But there are portions of that preserved garden that are essentially full city lots. And there's one portion of that preserved garden that I'm referring to when I mention it as a clubhouse.
Right. Would it be safe to say though, Angel, that although that may be the case, it's one operator that the city has that's operating this community garden?
So it's community people that operate community gardens.
Okay, so it's not specifically one type or one specific.
No. It's local folks that operate gardens, and the designation is by the city. So like the city designated it a green thumb garden and as such preserved it. Any garden has that title means that it's preserved and it is not subject to development. The other two lots are not part of the preserved green thumb garden and as such are subject to development.
Got it. Thank you.
Steve, you did have 2 more questions from committee and then 3 hands up from the public. So Jessica Morris, then Jessica Elliott, and then 3 from the public.
No problem.
So I'll keep it brief, and we'll talk about it next month, I'm sure. Looking at the full cluster, Las Raíces, 1761 Park Avenue, which is the biggest building planned. Angel, you started the meeting alerting us to or announcing that 2 buildings on Park Avenue at 118th Street and 120th Street will have filed permits for 20+ story buildings. What's planned here is at 122nd and Park, and it's 14 stories, kind of standard Park Avenue. But it is preserving a through block garden. And it's curious to me that, this is something we're gonna have to unpack and figure out whether, is HPD doing the right thing here as far as what the community wants? Are they exhausting all potentials of what's possible given the future of the typical building form in East Harlem? Maybe it's outside of the box thinking, but to suggest that there's a significant asset that may be lost in the process that is unretrievable. I think it's due diligence to ask as many questions to get both our housing and our existing piece of community investment spoken for in the process. So I look forward to next month continuing the conversation, because there's a lot of questions about the right thing, where, for whom, and how we can get, like I said, win-wins.
Okay. Jessica Elliott.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Angel's comments he just made. When I'm also part of a community garden, our garden is probably, not even as large as, even maybe half the size of the HPD lot. And I think just from my personal observations, I found it surprising that as part of the membership for Pleasant Village Community Garden, everyone received a plot in which to garden in, and with a smaller lot, and I guarantee not as many people, but our community garden doesn't have the space or the ability to provide every single person, or even half of the amount of people with their own beds, and it's very much a communal engagement process, and it's I can't say, one is better than the other, but to the point of whether or not the existing garden could be consolidated to, move the chicken coop and the native plants, composting, I don't disagree that there would, you know, it wouldn't be, you know, worth asking whether or not the uses on the HPD lot could be integrated into the larger Green Thumb lot.
The next hand up was Elsie Encarnacion.
Okay, Elsie.
Sorry. Hi again. I also said on environment open spaces, I saw the full presentation and it was extremely helpful in thinking about the importance of this space and the garden. But I do know that even if we were to take the spaces that we have now with HPD and stack buildings on top of them and make more spaces, we still need more. Like the affordable housing need is so dire in East Harlem that it tears me apart, because I know that, like I said, the presentation was much more in depth about the services that they provide, the events that happen there, the capability, and what will be lost is definitely something that hits home and is concerning, especially with the loss of the sunlight for the other garden. So it doesn't only take away the space that they have, but it also affects the sunlight into the garden that would stay Green Thumb. So that is something that, you know, is taken into consideration and was hard for me to think about. But the need for housing, and I think that's obviously been said enough by Angel and by other committee members, and obviously by the community board as a whole in our district needs. So yeah, it's a tough one, and I am also looking forward to that conversation, but I just know that there's just so much need, and it's very little space that we have actual control of in terms of city land. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well. It's not really a question.
Thank you, Elsie.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, if there are no further questions from the committee, we'll open it up to the public.
Okay, the first hand up was Christine Johnson, then Ruby, and then Alicia Colliden.
Hi, so I'm Chris Johnson, and I'm the current president of Pleasant Village Community Garden. So I'm going to try to answer your questions. I was going to do it, you know, in order that they came in, but then some other things came up that I think should be clarified first before I sort of answer some of the other questions. So first of all, when this building gets built, it will itself take away the part of the garden that has sun. So this isn't about the chickens having sun. The sun part is not where the chickens are. That's for sure. The other aspect to this, and I don't know where this stands, but the East Harlem Mall does plan to build, or had planned to build with the Blumenfeld group, 3 mammoth buildings at the end of 118th Street, at the end of the cobblestone road, of 30 stories, 40 stories, and 50 stories. Now, I don't know where that stands, but back when they proposed to build these buildings was when we were notified that this land would be taken. We had met with the Blumenfeld group, and they had done a study that in the midsummer, this is not even including the HPD land, we would lose 40% of our sun in the middle of the summer. So that's the Blumenfeld East Harlem group buildings, we would lose 40% of our sun. And so with that and this, that garden would effectively become a shade garden, for sure. That's one. 2, George hit it on the nose, actually, early on when he said that the COVID-19 has clearly changed the way where our priorities are. And I mentioned this in the talk before. People want open space. And if you develop all these open spaces and pile everyone on top of each other, and you have another pandemic where people cannot escape, where is the planning going forward in that? So if you're talking about planning looking forward in times of pandemics, in times where we are as a city overbuilt, that is also something to consider. The other thing, Vinny, someone mentioned something about when we were told and how this all came about. When HPD decided to take the land that we had been tending, take back, or I guess Benny Lee was the owner who passed away and taxes went unpaid, which is how the land then went into HPD. Nobody was consulted. We had already been tending that land for 5 years with reservation, with the fear that we might lose the land. And that was 5 years that we could have used that land far greater than we had. And it became apparent when we're sitting here, no one has, officially informed us. So we've kind of just taken this step that this is valuable land that has been wasted for a very long time up until we really started to use the land. So the other aspect to this is, and we do all understand, we all live in East Harlem. I've been in East Harlem for 20 years. And one of the things that you will notice is that that part of the land that is a quote unquote clubhouse, that became more of a clubhouse when all the other community gardens in the neighborhood were taken away for development. That's where all these people have come from, because they have been there for 40, 50 years in these gardens, or where they have their casitas, and they now come to our garden. And as I said in the presentation, this is their Long Island, this is their upstate, this is part of the community that cares about their community as much as new people coming in and who want to have a place to live. I understand that, and we understand that. And as I said in the presentation, we have a huge amount of support, not only from people who are homeless, and we have homeless people in our garden, but also from businesses that are supportive of saving this land. And again, George, I don't believe you saw the presentation. They were supportive of saving this land, even though they could potentially benefit from a new building. They are still supportive of saving this land. Did I miss anything to address the comments?
Could you just address the consolidation, maybe, potentially?
The consolidation. Oh, yeah. So if we consolidate, I mean, it's going to become a shade garden. There's this will not, if we consolidate, we could consolidate, sure, but we will not be able to grow. Especially if the Blumenfeld towers go up, there will not be any, that's just for sure. That is an absolute given. And that was, said even when Vicki Bean informed the 13 gardens that they would, their lots would be developed. We were told that you have to then view this as a shade garden, because the sun comes from the east to the west, and the majority of the sun is that angle that you see right there. That's where the majority of the sun comes. That, and then along the north wall against that building. So I don't know if anybody has any other questions for me that I can answer. If I answered everybody's questions, I hope I did.
Chris,
yeah.
I think one thing that would be helpful for the committee as well, can you speak a little bit about what your original license agreement with HPD was when they first agreed to let you onto the land?
That's a really good question, because believe it or not, and I don't have it in front of me, when that was first offered for us to use the land, I actually believe it was a lease and not a license. And then sort of quietly switched over to a license. And it was, I can't remember the man's name who was the head of HPD at the time, but they gave us license or a lease to use the land with the understanding that we would potentially, that we would lose the land eventually. And again, we were very cautious and conscientious about it. And if we had done that, if we had stayed in that state, we would never have achieved any of the things that we do. Again, including that compost bin, which you have people now upset because DSNY has decided to furlough the, that was my cat, sorry, who knocked over a lamp. Of course, right now. So DSNY is furloughing organics collection. And I can't tell you how many people are coming to me saying, Chris, can you open the garden so we could bring our organics in? And we can't because we're closed to the public right now. So that became a huge resource for people in the community. And now that DSNY is going to furlough organics collection for the next year, or however long they plan to furlough it, unless they change that, these are the places, your community gardens are the places that are actually taking for free, by volunteers, taking over the jobs that the city would normally pay for. That's all I'm going to say about that. So,
quick question for Chris. Thank you for all that information. Certainly has been informative. Do you and have you gotten any local support and support letters from any local organizations, CBOs, community-based organizations, or elected officials regarding this matter?
So we have a lot of letters from community organizations, the schools, the places that we donate food to. We have not been able to get city officials. When this sort of quote unquote fight or effort to save this land began, Diana Ayala was our council person. No, sorry, excuse me, that was Melissa Vivarito. And so we did not get support from Melissa Vivarito, and to some extent, I think it has been handed down a little bit to Diana Ayala. However, Gail Brewer has publicly given verbal support for the garden, but we don't have a letter from her. But I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in order for her to be able to give a letter of approval, it has to go through the community board first. Like, I guess there's that chain of events to get support from higher ups. But so political support in that respect. And I could be wrong about that, but that has always been my understanding.
Thank you.
The next questions are from M. Ruby and Alicia Collison.
Okay, just a time check. It is 10 after 9. We are going to conclude this discussion with these next 2 questions. And we will continue to carry this dialogue on as we weigh in further on this particular parcel. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hello to the members of the committee. And I wanted to say thank you first for your careful consideration of the nuances of affordable housing and what that looks like for our communities and the people we care about. I heard a lot of that earlier in your previous discussion. And I wanted to just share some of the ways that Pleasant Village Community Garden serves our community, and specifically on that lot, because of the sunlight, we're growing food for sharing at free and reduced cost. It's one of the ways that we serve people in need, and those who need access to affordable housing. It's an educational space for students at local elementary schools. It's a gathering space. And, you know, Jessica Morris, I really appreciated your comment about how cutting off an arm has more detrimental effects than simply losing that arm. But to lose that space in the garden would be massive overhaul, not only of the physical makeup of the space, but also of the emotional and the communal aspects of the garden and the ways that we all relate to that land and relate to each other in sharing space. You know, I think there's a lot of aspects to a community garden that are beyond simply gardening, that are about coming together and sharing space. And I think one of the ways that Pleasant Village does that in such a strong way is to have space for community and to have people coming together. And I know, Angel, you called it a clubhouse, and I think that that's actually one of the most important parts of the garden, is the ways that people are together and sharing space and taking care of each other in our garden. And yeah, I just wanted to note that. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
The next hand was Alicia Collison.
Yes, thank you. You pronounced it correctly. Thanks for that too.
Yes.
I really appreciate all of your time. I know it's getting very late, so I'll keep my comments brief. I am a community garden member of PVCG. I am also a local business owner. And to echo some of what was asked of Chris in terms of community support, I will say the majority of business owners have signed our petitions. They do support having the garden continue its operations there. They recognize the value that we provide as a safe haven in a not so good corridor of this neighborhood. I've been to a lot of police meetings where that's come up, and I just want to say that people that may be hanging out or being perceived as a clubhouse are actually there to safeguard us. They are there all hours of the day, and I personally have been helped up off the ground when I've tripped. Like Em said, we really are a community, and we come together on this block, in this lot, in this place, and it's been instrumental to my experience of the neighborhood over the last 11 years. And I just want to emphasize how the public really supports keeping this land for open space, for helping fill the gap of food insecurity, and for that coming together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay, we're going to conclude this discussion. We have taken vigorous notes on all sides of the spectrum here. I thank everybody for participating in this discussion. We'll continue to carry this on as we move forward throughout the year. Moving on in the agenda. Okay, before I pass this along to Angel, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be here. It's 9:15, and we'd be crazy not to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 in relation to every aspect of our discussions tonight. We have heard the media, regular media, about the economic impacts behind COVID-19 and the joblessness, so on and so forth. We know that the executive budget is being reviewed right now, and we also know that our push for deeper affordability involves subsidies, and those subsidies will definitely be impacted by budget cuts. So I will ask Angel to brief us on the budget.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm not going to brief you all on all the concepts of the executive budget, but just to continue down the line that Stephen laid out for us in terms of what I think we should be considering as a community board in light of what the city's financial state is now as a result of the ongoing pandemic. A couple of months ago, the mayor's office released their preliminary budget. We responded to that. Then the pandemic hits and the executive budget is released that shows a significant amount of cutting, right? You've heard from other committees and you've seen in papers, some of the more newsworthy items have been, the cuts to the summer youth employment program for the summer, this fiscal year and the coming fiscal year, cuts to the Department of Education, but of more to this committee, and I send a note to the committee members that I'll mention for those that are participating from the public. Like Stephen was explaining, our typical asks, right? Like as evidenced from the conversation we've had with the group earlier, our typical asks are for affordable housing 1, for more units 2, and for more deeply affordable units 3. All of those things, well, not all of them, but the second 2 are relying on government subsidy. And government subsidy comes in, in large measure as a result of tax revenue that the city just does not have and will not have as a result of, the ongoing shutdown. So I don't like typically sharing bad news, but the fact of the matter is that it's all bad news. And I think that despite that, and despite the unease that realization, will make us feel, I think that it's important to be fully aware of that as we are, preparing, our responses to the executive budget. What kind of guidance are we going to give to our local council members that are going to be representing our interests in the budget, in the ongoing budget negotiations with the administration, to best serve the needs of our communities, right? So every community in the city is going to get hit, but communities like ours are going to get hit the worst. So even under the best of times, we're way behind the 8 ball. And now we're going to be even more so. The disproportionate impacts of the virus, the disproportionate impacts of closing of businesses, disproportionate impacts of people at threat of losing their homes once this eviction moratorium is lifted, are more present in communities like ours than in many other communities, right? Like we've heard from some of our colleagues, even on this call, that some communities, residents have the ability to just leave the city, right? And God bless them, but in our district, that's just not the case. We're there, by and large, or the people that we're representing are there, right? They are trying to deal with this new reality and trying to deal with so much uncertainty. Nobody has answers. We could bring in every expert in the whole world and nobody has the answers. All that said, I think it's important for us to take these things into consideration. But then as it relates to the budget, I think we need to, my suggestion is that we reprioritize or prioritize or find the priority amongst the priorities that we're going to push our council members to really fight for on our behalf. Our local council members are absolutely fighting for summer youth, but they're in for a harsh reality too. Like the funding is just not going to be there unless some miracle happens and the federal government comes to our rescue. And I pray that that's the case, but it just doesn't smell like it's going to happen. So we'll see. But we can deal with what we have in hand now. What we have in hand now is trying to figure out how in the world we're going to balance our budget, given like the loss of tax revenue and the fact people are not working. I think for this committee and for our board, it's important to find those priorities of priorities, right? Like we were just talking about this garden and in the context of affordable housing being one of our priorities, right? So is that something that we're going to re-emphasize? Like, look, if you have a more limited amount of funding, Mr. Mayor, but you're still seeking to do, affordable housing, please bring it to our neighborhood. Right? Please prioritize neighborhoods like ours versus other neighborhoods, so that those finite tax, subsidy dollars that are remaining that you'll still have at your disposal are being used where it can have the most impact. So that's just the picture that I wanted to paint for you and to elevate this, kind of honest assessment of where we are. Again, I don't like sharing bad news. It makes me uncomfortable, but it's just what it is. And I think it's important to base ourselves in that harsh and uncomfortable reality as we try to find the ways to be most productive.
Thank you very much, Angel. I'm going to open it up to the committee for any questions. Jessica Morris.
I'm sorry, I do always have a question. I know everybody wants to get on with things. Thank you, Angel. I know you're not the Grim Reaper, but it's important to be honest about what we're facing and how we can do our best job to support any wins that may come out of things that are less than ideal. My question is the District Needs and Budget Committee doing some strategizing and what there are short-term wins, there are middle-term wins, and there are long-term wins. How quickly do you pivot to get what is needed now in order to perhaps then return to standing values at the right moment for later? And is the board informed enough, unified enough, trusting enough and sure enough about some of those assessments to perhaps do that dance if need be. I mean, we trust your advice, I think, in understanding the bigger picture. Some of those buildings take years.
Yeah.
But are there shorter term wins that we can get behind that will make the near term less brutal in what is felt relative to the crisis here?
I'm going to try to remember all your questions, Jessica. So the first one, yes, the budget committee is meeting tomorrow and is absolutely responsible for coordinating our response, and should be thinking about all three steps, right? Like right now, in the near term, and in the future. That certainly is their mandate. One thing that I've been mentioning to the chairs that I've been dealing with, and I will raise for discussion tomorrow, is the timeliness of all this, right? So typically we have, the preliminary budget stage where we have the most impact, and then the executive budget where we cross our fingers. But this year, everything's happening at the executive budget step. So time is of the essence to really get those messages to those individuals that are going to be at the table, negotiating the budget. My suggestion is that we do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible. At the very least, just to get in their ear, and then we can always, continue to be in their ear as as the budget is being negotiated. Of short-term wins, like I don't want to dodge it, but I think it's not my place to identify specifically what everyone's priorities are. I can remind you of the positions that you've taken, and I will more than happy to in those conversations. But I think more than ever, it's important for the membership to identify and discuss what they feel are the highest priorities. Some of the members already have started circulating information. Like some of them are concerned about police, funding. Some of them are concerned about summer youth. Some of them are concerned about, transportation and the like. And I think that those are the things that, have already been put on the table and absolutely will be the for them. But I think that more of those kinds of ideas have to come to the table. Committee is not the be all and end all of the discussion in regards to the budget. It's actually just the body that coordinates all the input from the broader membership. And that committee is going to need the help of the broader membership, throwing ideas, when folks can't show up or, write things or whatever. And I think we have to figure out what the logistics are going to be for turning around a quick response, and then the logistics for the next response.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Jessica, for your question. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, that was a perfect segue into action. By the end of this meeting, I'm hoping to have a Google Doc started for the committee. Budget committee should be meeting tomorrow. Dump any thoughts you have about priorities as to land use and the budget into that Google Doc. Angel has agreed to serve as our liaison to budget and our particular concerns so that they may follow up and lead on this item with a decision. Open it up to questions from the public. Okay, Angel, is there anything further on the budget?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I just wanted to let that one. So I did have occasion to speak with HPD about possible impacts to their programming and their projects in our district. Now, they're still in the process of ironing all this stuff out. They're trying to figure it out themselves. Typically, June is when projects are closed, so there's a lot of balls in the air, right? But I just wanted to share that we have been in conversations. They're optimistic. Some projects will continue to move forward, particularly the ones where they're at the selection process of selecting respondents to RFPs, which isn't necessarily beholden to the availability of funding at this very moment. But some projects that we're looking to close may be pushed off, right? And we're having pretty much weekly conversations, and I'll try to stay on them to the extent possible and get more clarity as to whether Project A or Project B is moving forward or not moving forward. But, I just wanted to share that, we've had those conversations and that there are, I think the anticipation is that there will be impacts to projects that we've been anticipating.
Thank you very much, Angel. If there are no further questions, we'll move on in the agenda. Do we have any new business? No new business. Okay, I just want to conclude this meeting with some next steps. Number one, the Google Doc will be developed within minutes of ending this meeting. And if not, feel free to send me and Angel any comments you have in relation to the budget. Number two, I asked the committee members to review the 125th Street presentation that will be shared and dumped on Google Drive for you to have easy access to. Mind the document, review it, and we can continue to influence ongoing dialogue and buckets. Because this touches every aspect of the board and not just our committee, we will consider utilizing the cross-committee collaboration tool that was developed by one of our committee members, Jessica Elliott. Moving on, just Angel, I guess Carly will be the point person on this. The voluntary inclusionary housing application. If we could just make sure we follow up with those marketing resources, housing ambassador resources, and separate out the local hiring guidelines and marketing guidelines, irrespective of the fact that it was already included in the packet. And lastly, I know we talked about the urban renewal plan that expiring at the end of this year. I believe it's called the Harlem, East Harlem plan. And we should have a copy of it available to us on the drive as well. Thank everyone for participating in today's meeting. And if there are no other questions, we are going to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.